Flawed gems are some of my favorite pieces of media. While it's easy to praise groundbreaking titles and discuss their lasting legacies, I think it's more fun to explore games that barely miss the mark. Everyone has a unique relationship with them, and asking people for their thoughts almost always starts an interesting conversation. Some will passionately defend these games, while others will vehemently detest their existence. People will also just call them mid, but I personally love talking about them. Flawed gems are usually rough and have a reason for ending up the way they are. Whether it's multiple directors, a lack of funding, intellectual property disputes, the studio getting shut down, or a plethora of other reasons, explain why games end up the way they do. It's important to remember that games, unlike albums, comics, manga, books, movies, and TV shows, have much larger margins for error. As such, it's much easier to create a passion project filled with ambition that probably doesn't play too well. While there's a lot of flawed games I like to cover on this channel, 2014's The Evil Within has a special place in my heart, with all of its blemishes. I distinctly remember playing this game back in 2016 and hating pretty much everything about it. The characters are bland, the bosses are bad, why do I keep dying, this game sucks, and the story doesn't make any sense for my initial impressions after my first playthrough. I even remember uninstalling this game and vowing to never play it again. And almost 11 years later, I have 100 hours in this game, so what happened? Before answering that question, let's rewind the clock back to 2016 and discuss my issues with The Evil Within. Something players will immediately realize is this game is just kind of janky. I'm not sure how this game performed on consoles, but I doubt it was locked at 30 FPS. Launching in 2014, The Evil Within launched on previous and current generations of consoles at the time. I thought I'd bring this up because Tango Gameworks, a modest AA studio at the time, created several versions of this game with mixed results. With the PC version, moving the mouse on the main menu and in the weapon wheel feels rough because you can't move diagonally without a ton of force. When gently pulling down to the right, the mouse will either move vertically down or horizontally to the right. This will work if you drag down with a ton of force, but the fact that basic mouse movement doesn't work it's not a good look. Fortunately, this isn't a problem when playing the game. Unfortunately, we have another problem. Your mouse sensitivity doesn't save. When you go into the settings, set your mouse sensitivity and return to the game, it works. However, each time you restart the game and load your save, you'll have an entirely different sensitivity. This is easy enough to fix, but I got tired of fixing it, so I just played the other half of the game on a controller. Another technical issue that I had throughout the entire game was with the lighting. As you can see, some areas will randomly flicker between red, white, and blue. The issue varies in severity based on chapter. At least this is a simple cosmetic issue that doesn't take me out of the experience, except that it's crashed in the past a bunch. Admittedly, I didn't have any crashes with this playthrough. Japanese PC ports have always felt 10 years behind the industry, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I should probably temper my expectations since this game runs on id Tech 5. It's just a bit concerning when Creative Assembly's Alien Isolation, which released the same year, was far more stable with a list of graphic settings, but I digress. To make things worse, The Evil Within received one final update in 2021 following Microsoft's purchase of Tango Gameworks' parent company, ZeniMax Media. The Evil Within released on Xbox Game Pass with an update that never released on the PlayStation, Xbox Series systems, or PC versions. This update added a first-person mode, a field of view slider, an infinite ammo mode, stamina adjustments, additional camera changes, and more. The FOV slider, stamina changes, and first-person mode sound like excellent quality of life changes I'm jealous that we'll never get. Since we're talking about gameplay changes, let's spend a few minutes discussing The Evil Within's unique game design. Something I've wrestled with since my first playthrough is why the game leaves an awful first impression. I can't decide whether the early game is too punishing or Sebastian is severely underpowered. The punishing nature of The Evil Within is derived from the sheer volume of one-hit enemies and the movement options. After waking up at the butcher's, we free ourselves, get the key, and run away from the sadist. If you don't escape, you'll immediately die. Afterwards, you're greeted with a stealth section that finds you dead if you're caught. The Evil Within has a plethora of enemies, puzzles, bosses, stage traps, dynamite-throwing enemies, and more ways to die in one hit. I wouldn't be surprised if Shinji Mikami's cavalier use of this design was a large source of frustration amongst players. I've spoken about this at length in past horror videos, so I'll keep it short. Touch of death enemies run the risk of taking players out of the experience. Horror games live and die by their immersion and believability. Every time we die to a touch of death enemy, we're slowly removed from the horror atmosphere. There's a very real sense of tension and horror to touch of death enemies, yet The Evil Within achieves the opposite effect here with how easy it is to die. Masterful horror games deliberately implement touch of death enemies into their games. Preserving these moments for scripted sections, bosses, and occasional enemies would have preserved this sense of fear. Fortunately, all the enemies don't function like this. As a matter of fact, there's plenty of enemies that are fun to fight against with unique designs and attacks. The new problem unfortunately comes from running and getting hit. Sebastian can be upgraded with green gel that can be found throughout the world, blocks in the safe room, or harvested from defeated enemies. When starting the game, Sebastian's base stats are quite disappointing. For some reason, a seasoned detective can only run for like 2 or 3 seconds before getting tired. When your stamina bar starts flashing red, Sebastian will start to slow down. And if you burn through all your stamina, Sebastian puts his hands on his knees as he gathers his breath. Players can't move during this animation, leaving you wide open to attacks. And after seeing this once, you'll probably never intentionally do this again. The Evil Within also has this idle aim drift. I think these mechanics were added to make the game more difficult, but I'd argue these methods might be some of the worst ways to go about it. A mediocre starting sprint, heavily restricting player movement, and introducing a reticle drift makes your game more frustrating than difficult. Difficult and frustrating games are mutually exclusive in my opinion. I'd love to make a video one day discussing the difficulty because, to be fair to the Evil Within, introducing meaningful difficulty is hard and much more nuanced than simply reducing health or even changing damage values. But who knows, maybe the game was designed like this to incentivize players to use the skill tree. In general, I'm fine with most skill trees. They're an easy way to incentivize players to explore open worlds, rewards combat, provides us with agency over our decisions, and introduces a form of progression. The problem with the Evil Within skill tree is the size of it. Between health, stamina, ammo, weapon damage, accuracy, fire rate, and critical hit rate, to name a few, it can feel a bit overwhelming. We'll revisit this later because this is more of a mixed bag than a huge issue in my opinion. I believe a lot of these issues could have been resolved by providing base Sebastian with deeper pockets for ammo, a larger stamina bar, and reducing the reticle sway. And while these have been common complaints from the community for over a decade now, I can't understate just how bad these complaints are. If you enjoy this game like I do, I'm sure you prioritize the same upgrades before trying new things every time. This level of customization feels more akin to something you'd find in an RPG. Even though I adore how much replay value this adds, all these decisions contribute to the Evil Within's identity crisis. In the first chapter, when you're chased by the sadist, we're provided with areas to hide, bottles to throw, and we die if we're caught. This level design, the mechanics we can use, and being hunted encourages the popular hide-and-seek horror playstyle. In the very next chapter, we're introduced to stealth attacks, booby traps, several weapons, craftable bolts for the Agony crossbow, a skill tree, and an expansive level design crafted to support several playstyles. Players can rely on stealth if they'd like, but stealth can feel a bit janky. Enemy detection ranges are inconsistent, some enemies will randomly turn around, and there is no button to easily change the camera's perspective. By the time you reach the mid-game, you'll be familiar with the systems and/or Sebastian will be strong enough by then. Unless you're short on ammo, you'll probably blast through everything the game throws at you as you ignore all the beds and lockers to hide in. I guess it's a good thing these are present throughout the game, but I wouldn't be surprised if people forgot or just didn't use these since Sebastian quickly becomes a force. Stages are also littered with these bottles, which are ironically some of my favorite weapons. Bottles can either be used to distract enemies, force them to another location, or can be thrown at their face to trigger a potential stealth kill. There are also several stage traps that can be used to stop enemies from moving or kill them amongst other things. The reason I'm discussing these mechanics, and it's strange saying this, is to highlight some of the emergent gameplay the Evil Within introduces. Emergent gameplay is a term often associated with some of my favorite games, immersive sims. If you haven't played an immersive sim before, which makes sense since they, usually kill AAA studios, I like to describe them as a modular game design philosophy. They're designed to provide players with systems and mechanics, allowing us to create unique solutions to problems. Let's use Arcane Austin's criminally underrated masterpiece, Prey, which I did a full video on if you're curious. In this clip, I'm trying to access the morgue. The front door requires a key to enter, and there isn't a gate or a vent that takes us into the room. As you search for an entrance, you'll stumble across the gated window with a button that opens the door. And if you have the toy crossbow, you can aim and shoot a bolt at the door to open it. Players that don't have the crossbow can also search for the key card or use one of Prey's Typhon powers to enter the room. Now, if you haven't played Prey before or any other immersive sim, you probably think this is all the weapon does, but opening doors only scratches the surface. This toy crossbow can interact with computer screens, incapacitate certain enemies, and more depending on who you ask. Player expression is a huge part of why Prey and immersive sims are so engaging. Weapon utilities, vast skill trees, and narrative decisions coalesce to create this sense of emergent gameplay. The open-ended system and mechanics are designed to encourage player agency above all else. So, what I call the Evil Within an immersive sim, not even a little bit. Most of the weapons are designed with one purpose in mind, and the level design is far too static, but the glass bottle's utility reminds me of something you'd find in Deus Ex, System Shock, Prey 2017, or other great immersive sims. I just wanted to call this out because outside of Amnesia the Bunker, which you should definitely play if you haven't, I can't name many other horror games with emergent gameplay, and this serves as a microcosm of everything wrong with Evil Within. Sometimes it wants to be an action game, other times it wants to be a hide-and-seek horror game, and occasionally it wants to be a survival horror game. The level design, atmosphere, and other mechanics often feel like they're at odds with each other. Although I enjoy and respect the ambition and gameplay variety, the execution makes the game feel a bit all over the place at times. I think I have to bring this up since Mikami has demonstrated a clear mastery of pacing, tension, and focus with his Resident Evil directed titles. The way RE1 Remake slowly shifts from this sprawling interconnected mansion with scarce ammo into these tiny claustrophobic halls where you're destroying everything is absolutely sublime. Even Resident Evil 4, a game that I'm not a huge fan of, masterfully leverages downtime for players to reflect on narrative or gameplay moments. Conversely, The Evil Within feels sporadic with its approach. Jack of all trades, master of none is probably the best way to describe it. The most consistent part of the gameplay are the boss battles, but that doesn't mean they're perfect either. Most of the Evil Within's boss battles fall into one of three categories: one-hit kill enemies like Laura, puzzle bosses like the Keeper, and/or hybrids like Amalgam Alpha. With uniquely terrifying intro, Laura is a boss that initially chases you before fighting her. Before we talk about this boss fight, I want to quickly shout out Akumi Nakamura for creating some absolutely horrifying bosses. Laura's design in particular leverages an onryo from Japanese folklore. If you've seen any Japanese horror, whether it's anime, manga, or live-action movies, I'm sure you're familiar with this design. Nakamura's interpretation of this monster is exceptional. Laura is this creature with 4 arms, 2 legs, long nails, and very long black hair. Her body exhibits signs of burn marks or just burnt. When we first meet her, she has this ghastly scream you'll probably never forget. While not as grotesque as Amalgam Alpha or the other bosses, there's a level of body and psychological horror that's really uncomfortable, but I don't know why I'm spending so much time on her design, like we'll be able to even see it. Laura's design matches the ferociousness of her attacks. Laura can walk, run, teleport, and grab you. Her Chapter 5 boss fight finds Sebastian trapped in this industrial area littered with corpses, explosive barrels, matches, torches, and burners. There's ammo in this room if you like to shoot her, but she has an enormous health pool and the game is clearly encouraging us to use fire. What makes this boss tricky, terrifying, and frustrating all at once is her touch of death grab. Combine the touch of death nature with her enormous health pool and the lack of checkpoints, and you get a boss that's more frustrating than stressful. While I've admittedly softened up on this boss battle over the years, I'd argue I'm more tolerant than bewildered by its execution nowadays. However, I'd be remiss to dismiss my initial thoughts of frustration. This could be a personal problem though. Maybe I was a dumb 20-year-old that couldn't figure out how to beat her and everyone else had a good time with her. Reflecting on this fight a decade later, providing Laura with another attack that did half or 3/4 of your life would have made this fight less frustrating and preserved the tension. Amalgam Alpha's design would have been a happy medium in my opinion. Amalgam Alpha is this terrifying huge 4-legged beast. His boss fight takes place in a parking lot packed with ammo, explosive barrels, with rooms and pillars to hide. After getting it down to half health, its body will transform, showing its core, which is of course an eye. This phase of the boss battle is much more dangerous since it has access to a touch of death attack. Amalgam Alpha is fast, deals enormous damage, and its boss arena is very well designed, but the horror and tension are wrapped up for the second half. The second half delivers a whole new layer of fight or flight since one mistake means you're dead. Even though this fight isn't as punishing or memorable as Laura, it's nowhere near as frustrating to play either. Now in all fairness to Laura, I'm only focusing on one boss fight. Laura appears in a chase section before her boss battle in Chapter 10 as well. Starting as a chase where you have to shoot these valves to progress, we eventually find ourselves in this cramped claustrophobic area where we can either fight or escape. This encounter finds us fighting for space, keeping an eye on Laura and avoiding traps while frantically shooting valves and pulling levers to create an escape route. If you choose to escape like most of us did on our first playthroughs, this fight turns into a race or battle of attrition. It's designed to be this high-stress encounter testing our endurance and situational awareness, yet this rush is juxtaposed with Laura's punishing design. With fast movement, a large grab range, a small area to traverse, minimal ammo, and waiting for an escape route to appear, terror quickly becomes frustration. Nevertheless, The Evil Within is more than capable of creating an engaging puzzle boss as well. The Keeper in Chapter 7 is an outstanding boss battle. The Keeper is this tower of a creature with a safe as a head, a giant hammer, and this spiky bag of death. Initially taunting you throughout the catacombs, you eventually confront him after catching up to Leslie. I love how the game initially tricks us into thinking, oh, he's just another boss. After putting him down with a few bullets, a door opens engulfing the area with this poison toxic. Searching for an escape route, you'll start tightening a valve as he resurrects in the corner while this black ghosting effect plays. Although more scripted than the other bosses, the Keeper's fight is a ton of fun. Cautiously watching the timer, searching for the next valve, Sebastian desperately locking doors, and being stalked by this unkillable monster perfectly captures this sense of dread. The only issue I have with the Keeper is how static things are. Adding another valve, randomizing the location of them, and adding more saves for the Keeper to potentially spawn would have preserved tension on future playthroughs. Designing boss battles to be more dynamic in games that are meant to be replayed is always a good idea in my opinion. All in all, the bosses are a mixed bag leaning towards positive. Some are tolerable while others are intolerable, which if you've seen my other survival horror videos means they're actually pretty good. I usually criticize bosses in survival horror games for clashing with the game design, but they mostly don't really bother me here. Another common complaint I have with survival horror games are their runtimes, and The Evil Within certainly drags its feet across the finish line. The Evil Within by survival horror standards can be a lengthy game. Complaining about game length always feels ironic since I, love JRPGs. Alien Isolation was released in 2014 for $60 with an average runtime of between 18 to 20 hours. Completing all the Resident Evil 2 2019 scenarios will take you between 15 to 20 hours, and Scorn, a puzzle horror game released in 2022 for $40, could be completed in about 5 to 6 hours. Horror game length finds itself between a rock and a hard place. Make your game too long and risk players becoming comfortable in the environments and atmosphere, or make them too short and people complain about the asking price. Unlockable weapons, collectibles, and solid mechanics can help alleviate this pricing issue. Then again, this isn't a problem if you enjoy the game. In my Alien Isolation video, I said the length didn't bother me because I was engrossed in the world, atmosphere, level design, interacting with the alien, and I'm a fan of the franchise. I had a great time revisiting the game and would easily do it again despite its runtime. This is a much more nuanced issue for people, but I wouldn't be surprised if we were all exhausted when The Evil Within's credits finally rolled. And to make things more complicated, I've revisited this game over the years despite my initial conflicting thoughts. If I hated everything about this game, I probably wouldn't have produced this video. As such, I think it's time to explain why I ultimately enjoy this game. When The Evil Within was first revealed, it felt like a lot of people took issue with its visuals, or more specifically, the lack thereof. The Evil Within launched with a distinct aspect ratio achieved by using these black bars. Mikami and the team clearly had an initial vision for the game, but they added a toggle to remove these bars in a future update. In my opinion, these were added to provide the game with a more cinematic feel. If you've been watching this video, you already know my preference. The game undoubtedly feels different, but the zoomed in field of view prohibits too much of our vision, especially in a game that's this punishing. I do, however, love this aspect ratio when watching the cutscenes. This aspect ratio with the shot composition makes scenes feel cinematic and uncomfortable at times. I also adore how expressive these cutscenes are. Let's use this scene where Sebastian attacks Kidman as an example. Before entering this room, notice how much more saturated this area is. The Evil Within is a game with a very deliberate color palette. The washed out saturation is meant to synergize with the horror atmosphere. When Sebastian and Julie walk into the room, notice how much the saturation immediately disappears. The doll in the corner, the bright light above the entrance, the grayer tone, and the sun shining through the roof presents this uncomfortable atmosphere as both detectives clear their corners. We then get this close-up shot of them slowly passing through the room before Sebastian's attack. Sebastian starts bleeding and turns into a monster as he attacks Julie before the camera blacks out. For such a small scene in the grand scheme of things, I really appreciate the composition of it. Adjusting the lighting, further muting the saturation, and jumping between a third and first person camera is why I never skip these cutscenes. Each cutscene is overflowing with style and has something unique to appreciate. This praise can also be extended to The Evil Within's graphics. For an 11-year-old cross-platform game, I still think it looks pretty good. As an aside, playing games without upscaling or frame generation in 2025 is kinda surreal as well. There's a level of sharpness older games have that most modern games don't anymore. Don't get me wrong, the PC port is still janky and there's probably performance issues on the console versions, but at least it's not as blurry as some of the new games that we get today. Even though it doesn't work properly, I still love The Evil Within's lighting as well. There's a ton of volumetric fog that still looks great. The lighting, reflections, particle effects, and other stuff still looks good. There were countless moments during my playthrough where I found myself just turning the lamp on and off. If there's enough natural light for you to progress, I cannot recommend enough to just turn the lamp off and just get immersed into the atmosphere. Being more immersed in the world can drastically improve the gameplay since it adds another layer of tension and obviously more immersion. On the topic of gameplay, I criticized the Evil Within's enormous skill tree, mediocre stealth, abundance of one-hit enemies, and how weak Sebastian starts off earlier. However, when you reach the mid to late game, Sebastian becomes so powerful you'll start to question if this is still a survival horror game. Killing enemies, crafting bolts, picking up ammo, blowing up barrels, and using booby traps as you run through levels is a lot of fun. Excluding Laura, the second half of the game feels like a power fantasy as you pretty much destroy everything in sight. Blending high-risk claustrophobic stealth sections with levels you can approach however you like makes the late game a ton of fun, and regardless of how powerful you become, the game preserves its tension and atmosphere throughout its entire runtime. Whether you're creeping around a mansion, exploring the catacombs, crawling through a dimly lit subway station, or making your way through the sewers, Mikami and Tango went out of their way to keep players on edge. As frustrated as I was on my first playthrough, I was eager to see what the game would throw at me next. It's also impressive how sustaining this level of horror didn't compromise the gameplay either. An area I don't think The Evil Within receives enough praise for is its remarkable level design. Levels can be broken down into a few categories: battle arenas, linear levels with branching paths, boss arenas, and these semi-common hybrid areas. Battle arenas harbor the most variants, so let's start with those. Chapter 4 finds Sebastian trapped in this room. There are floor traps, wall traps, ammo, explosive barrels, ladders, and a pool of blood limiting our movement. As you approach the exit, Ruben locks the door, spawns a horde of enemies to fight, and it's up to us to survive. This level works so well because of how many approaches players can take. Do you want to use the traps around the stage? Would you prefer to defuse the bombs and use your crossbow? Or maybe you have enough ammo and you just want to fight them all head on. Some battle arenas even find Sebastian in larger areas that allow for new strategies. In Chapter 15, Ruben traps Sebastian in this room with several waves of enemies. With the overabundance of ammo and how easy it is to traverse the area, this room is practically begging us to use everything at our disposal. This results in one of the most fun areas in the game. Other levels like Chapter 4 finds us exploring an abandoned medical ward. The level design here is fairly linear with a few branching paths for collectibles. To shake things up, invisible enemies are introduced, forcing players to closely examine their surroundings, or they can expend valuable resources to find them. Boss arenas and forced stealth sections are self-explanatory, but I'd argue that the game is at its best when they blend battle arenas with these stealth elements. These can be found throughout the game, but let's use Chapter 13's apartment as an example here. The apartments are these tight claustrophobic halls populated with deadly enemies, acidic traps, floor mines, lockers to hide, and more. While not as large as other levels, we're provided with a few paths and options to tackle these levels as we want. We can slow things down and hide, go around enemies, stealth kill them, and or use traps. And if none of these options work for you or you've invested into more combat abilities, shooting everything's always an option. Creating environments where players can tackle enemies however they'd like works very well with the variety of bolts, builds, and weapons available. This game, being one of 2 horror games I have over 100 hours in, is a testament to its gameplay and its replay value. The stages and combat go a far way to help here, but the enemy variety is also on point. Whether it's Laura, the sadist, the variety of haunted, invisible enemies, or monsters with 2 heads, The Evil Within aspires to keep players on their toes. Even though most enemies evolve into, shooting them in the face, some of them have unique quirks like being invisible, killing you in one hit, wearing armor, or using long-range attacks, to name a few. Some of the enemies, especially the bosses, even have psychologically horrifying implications within the convoluted narrative. The Evil Within's narrative has received a lot of justified criticism over the years. The story was initially filled with plot holes, scarce with details, relied on DLC to make sense of it, and probably left most of us frustrated when the credits rolled. Yet, the story, after wrapping my mind around it, is actually kinda cool. Instead of following a traditional story structure, The Evil Within implements a non-linear story. I guess it's linear in the sense of story progression, but the frequently changing levels, glimpses into reality, and things just randomly happening with no rhyme or reason makes following the story challenging. Personally, I love non-linear storytelling. Telling stories like this really makes you feel like a detective, slowly combing through levels, reading diaries, and piecing what and why things are the way they are really gets you into the mind of Ruben, the mad scientist's mind you're exploring. Nevertheless, there are 2 questions writers need to ask themselves before writing a non-linear story. Why are you writing a story like this, and is the gamble worth taking? Committing to non-linear storytelling forces readers, viewers, or players to make sense of what they're engaging with. Challenging the audience to reflect, converse in threads, and speak with friends to make sense of the story is something most creatives are terrified with. This can result in someone dropping the game or feeling unsatisfied after beating it, which is why I wonder what they were seeking to accomplish with this approach here. After my second playthrough and actually reading Sebastian's notes this time, I found myself really enjoying the story despite its issues. Sebastian went from being an ambitious rookie cop to getting married and becoming an alcoholic after his daughter and wife's disappearance. The game touches on his drinking problem in Chapter 6 when Oda makes a passing remark. We also come across a journal entry explaining how everyone knows about Sebastian's drinking problem and how he's sometimes just drunk on the job. Julie Kidman is a new detective who's a bit distant from Sebastian and Joseph. Sebastian realizes something's off and tells Joseph to keep an eye on her. Most of Julie's development takes place in the DLC, so just keep this in mind for later. Joseph Oda, Sebastian's partner, really isn't worth mentioning. Outside of wrestling with what I think is depression, he really doesn't have much going on other than being voiced by Yuri Lowenthal. I actually forgot that he dies towards the end of the game. Beyond the main cast, I really enjoyed Marcelo Jimenez and Ruben Victoriano as well. Jimenez is a scientist with an agenda. Very early on, he clearly knows more than he's sharing and sees Leslie as an integral piece to his plan. This mystery is slowly reeled back as we learn about Jimenez's relationship with Ruben and of Leslie's importance. Long story short, Jimenez realized Ruben was a brilliant scientist at a young age. While exhibiting clear signs of psychopathic behavior, an unhealthy level of affection for his sister, and experimenting on his parents, Ruben's genius couldn't be ignored by Jimenez and his employer. This led to Ruben developing a machine called STEM with them. Essentially, STEM was a machine designed to connect people's consciousness into a single core. Desperate for results, Mobius, the shady organization employing Kidman, Jimenez, and behind everything, used Ruben's brain as the core and connected the entire cast to it. The reason Ruben appears everywhere, monsters are the way they are, the city's falling apart, and things are so incoherent is because we've been exploring inside a psychopath's mind. And when this is finally revealed, everything we've been experiencing, reading, and piecing together transforms into something that's downright disturbing. If you don't piece this together until the end of the game, I think it's worth doing another playthrough. Stages, set pieces, characters, and other areas become psychologically frightening. And when the areas don't make sense with this context, we can speculate that they're either Ruben's sadistic nature or he's just fucking with us. Diving into his mind was a great idea, and not answering every question let us piece together or speculate their meaning. I probably don't have to say this, but I actually really enjoyed the Evil Within story after letting it marinate. The disjointed nature of the narrative, the writing, and often obscure execution is bound to leave a rough first impression though. This story won't be for everyone. I can empathize with others' frustration, and I get why Tango course corrected so hard in the DLCs and the sequel. The Evil Within's DLC is probably the most consistent part of the game. The two DLC worth playing find us experiencing the main campaign through the eyes of Julie Kidman. On a side note, why do we just call her Kidman and not Julie? I'm cool with it of course, but no one calls Joseph Oda, Sebastian Castellanos, or Ruben just Victoriano. Anyways, the DLC is much more personal for Julie. We learn about Mobius, why they created STEM, Julie's upbringing, and most importantly, we get a ton of context and answers to lingering questions. One of my favorite moments was experiencing Sebastian's life before his daughter and wife disappeared. He genuinely seems like an entirely different person, adding weight to how distant and cold he becomes during the main campaign. The course correction I alluded to earlier was pertaining to the writing. Unlike the main campaign's nonlinear narrative, John Johannes, the director of both The Assignment and The Consequence, implemented a traditional storytelling approach, resulting in a vastly improved story. Both DLC's narratives are much more focused, better written, and feel more compelling. If you're a fan of The Evil Within and haven't played either of the DLCs, it's worth playing for the story alone. The DLC feels transformative with all the new context provided. Where things get dicey is with the new gameplay direction. If you're a fan of the main campaign's gameplay, you might be disappointed here. Instead of having a weapon to defend yourself, Kidman is provided with a flashlight, bottles, a yell, occasional axes, and can peek around corners. She's mainly defenseless and forced to hide in lockers or just run away. The punishing nature of being caught with the cramped level design delivers a layer of fear absent from the main campaign. One of my favorite moments from the DLC is easily the Shade boss battle. Shade is this monstrosity of a creature stalking Julie throughout the game. Towards the end of the first chapter, Julie finds herself trying to escape Mobius' headquarters by elevator. After scanning her hand, the power goes out. While the power is being restored, you're trapped in this tiny server room as Shade hunts you. This fight, if you want to call it that, is great. Keeping an eye on the power, avoiding Shade, and this already small room shrinking is absolutely terrifying. There are plenty of other memorable moments too, like illuminating a path forward with glow sticks after losing your flashlight, or even just some outstanding set pieces. With that said, however, the gameplay won't be for everyone. Nothing here will change your mind or make you appreciate the hide and seek gameplay. Like I said earlier, fans of the original story owe it to themselves to experience this. The biggest problem with the DLC, and all story DLC for that matter, is it should have been included in the main game. When The Evil Within released, the most popular criticism it faced was with the story, and after playing the DLC, Mikami, Johannes, and Tango clearly had a more realized vision in mind. We can only speculate who's to blame here since development articles are scarce. Regardless, I think this game would have been better received if the DLC's plot had been written into the main narrative. The issue with this approach is they'd make an already long game even longer. Then again, jumping between Sebastian and Kidman would have made for a more compelling story in my opinion. So, what are my final thoughts on The Evil Within? Thinking about this game and planning an outline, I thought this video would have been much shorter, right? I was probably thinking 10 or 15 minutes. This video, however, is kind of unique compared to my other projects. I usually find myself talking about the gaming industry, streaming games I plan to talk about, like this game, or just gushing about games that I adore. What makes this video unique is I'm pretty divided on this game, honestly. It's hard to assess whether I've grown to appreciate this game over the years, or I just have Stockholm Syndrome. The reason I made this video was to do something different and explore my conflicting relationship with this game. I'm sure we all have pieces of media where some days we hate it and other days we love it. Even though I have conflicting thoughts on the bosses, gameplay direction, game design choices, and how the story is delivered, for whatever reason, I find myself coming back to this game every few years. I think the psychological horror is very well done. I think the bosses are iconic. I think the gameplay, after a few hours, is good, and even with its issues, I think piecing together the story is actually kind of fun, but I can't dismiss my immediate frustration after my first playthrough. Ultimately, The Evil Within is an ambitious, charming mess with a ton of heart. Despite its numerous shortcomings, I have a lot of respect for it for some reason. While it's far from my go-to survival horror recommendation, I think fans of the genre owe it to themselves to give it a try since it will leave you with an unforgettable experience. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. As you could tell from the conclusion, I definitely wanted to try something a little bit different. I think the last video I made like this was RE4, but I'm really curious to hear what everybody's thoughts are. Before we get into the outro, big shout out to all the domain dwellers for supporting me in all my creative endeavors. And if you'd like to join this list of illustrious people, please consider becoming a channel member or a subscriber over on Twitch, where I, stream footage for all these games. So what did you guys think of The Evil Within if you've played it? Maybe you haven't and you just watched this video, which, hey, I appreciate you being here regardless. But if you did play, what did you think of The Evil Within? Were you disappointed? Was I too critical? Do you think the story was fine as is? Do you think they should have just put in the assignment and the consequence into the main story? I think it personally would have made a lot more sense, but I don't know. You never know. There's people out there that probably really enjoyed this. Do you think the game was bad overall? I don't think it's bad. I think there are a lot of problems though. And were you frustrated after your first playthrough? And most importantly, if you enjoyed this video, would you like me to cover The Evil Within 2? Which, full transparency, I don't have anywhere as near as positive thoughts on that game. I'm currently replaying through it on Twitch if you'd like to catch the show live, but I remember liking certain segments of it, but others I was like, what are they going for? Anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. This video is long enough, so I will catch you guys in the next one, so have a great day.